Remember fighting for the last salmon party log at Grandma's Christmas table? Or watching that hot crab dip disappear before dinner even started?
I recall the salmon party log and the crab dip that vanished. Tonight,
Between 1948 and 1982, entertaining experts documented 30 Christmas party appetizers that were super famous at that time. By the mid-1970s, 20 of them showed up at every holiday gathering in America. Today, we make 3. These 30 vanished, not because they weren't delicious, but because the women who had the patience to make them are gone. We found them in vintage entertaining guides most families forgot existed. Tonight, we're bringing all 30 back with the original measurements. Walk into any 1955 Christmas open house and you'd find the salmon party log positioned like a crown jewel on the buffet table, surrounded by crackers arranged in perfect semicircles. This elegant creation cost $4 and fed 35 people. That's 11 cents per serving for something that looked like restaurant catering. But here's what made salmon party logs essential for Christmas hostesses. You could make them 3 days early, wrap them in wax paper, and forget about them until party time. 1 16-ounce can of salmon, 8 ounces of cream cheese, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 teaspoon of horseradish, 1 small grated onion, and 1 cup of chopped pecans for coating created something that tasted expensive, despite humble canned fish origins. Smart hostesses knew to drain that salmon completely, pressing it between paper towels until bone dry. Wet salmon made logs that wouldn't hold their shape, collapsing into sad mounds that announced amateur status to every woman at the party. Keeps refrigerated 5 days. The sound of a chafing dish being lit announced serious entertaining. That soft whoosh of the sterno can igniting meant your hostess had invested not just in ingredients, but in proper equipment that separated casual gatherings from elegant affairs. Hot crab dip cost $8 and served 25 people through an entire evening. Real crab meat, not imitation, mixed with 8 ounces of cream cheese, ½ cup of mayonnaise, 2 tablespoons of sherry, 1 teaspoon of dry mustard, and pinch of cayenne, created bubbling luxury that guests surrounded like moths to flame. The chafing dish solved the critical problem of keeping food hot without constant trips to the kitchen. 1 can of sterno burned for 2 hours, maintaining perfect serving temperature while hostesses actually talked to their guests instead of hovering over the stove. Women who owned chafing dishes earned respect at church socials and bridge clubs. That silver dish with its warming stand represented commitment to proper entertaining. Keeps warm 2 hours, reheats beautifully. The metallic sound of cookie cutters hitting baking sheets echoed through December kitchens as women prepared hundreds of these crispy coins that would fill tins lining their pantries. Cheese pennies cost $2 and produced 120 pieces. That's less than 2 cents each for something guests assumed took professional skill to create. 2 cups of grated sharp cheddar, 1 cup of flour, 1 stick of butter, ½ teaspoon of cayenne, and quarter teaspoon of salt mixed into dough that rolled thin, cut into perfect circles, and baked into golden wafers that snapped when you bit them. That satisfying crunch announced proper technique. Too soft meant insufficient baking, too hard meant the oven ran hot. Experienced hostesses made these in November, storing them in metal tins with tight lids that kept them crisp for 6 weeks. Opening those tins on Christmas morning released that sharp cheese aroma that meant the holidays had officially arrived. Keeps 2 months in airtight containers. The smell of bacon wrapping around oysters created the most divisive appetizer at any Christmas party. Half the guests fought for them. The other half wouldn't touch them with borrowed forks. This elegant preparation cost $10 and served 24 people. Fresh oysters weren't cheap, but wrapping them in bacon and broiling them until crispy transformed something intimidating into something irresistible for adventurous eaters. 24 fresh oysters, 12 strips of bacon cut in half, toothpicks, and 8 minutes under the broiler created restaurant-quality results that announced your hostess knew sophisticated food. The bacon fat dripped onto the pan, smoking and sizzling, while the oysters plumped up inside their crispy wrapping. Brave hostesses served these, knowing some guests would refuse them. That willingness to serve challenging food separated women who cooked to please everyone from women who cooked to impress the right people. Must be served immediately, don't keep. The sight of golden pastry triangles stacked on silver platters announced that your hostess had spent serious time in the kitchen. These weren't thrown-together snacks. These were commitment made visible through 40 individual pastries. Mushroom turnovers cost $5 and fed 40 people. 1 pound of mushrooms chopped fine, 1 small onion minced, 3 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour, ½ cup of sour cream, salt, pepper, and store-bought pie crust created elegant bites that looked professionally catered. The key was chopping those mushrooms into tiny pieces that released their moisture during cooking. Big chunks made soggy turnovers that leaked brown liquid onto party dresses. Patient women spent 30 minutes at the cutting board, creating mushroom pieces so small they almost disappeared into the creamy filling. Smart hostesses froze these unbaked, pulling them straight from freezer to oven when guests arrived. That fresh-baked aroma greeting people at the door was calculated hospitality. 5 appetizers down, and you're seeing the pattern. These weren't just snacks. They were demonstrations of effort that said, "You matter." Salmon logs made days early, crab dip requiring special equipment. Each one proved dedication to creating memorable experiences. 25 more recipes reveal how much love went into looking effortless. Christmas morning meant standing at the kitchen counter having hard-boiled eggs with a sharp knife, creating 24 perfect boats that would hold the most luxurious filling most families served all year. Stuffed eggs with caviar cost $12 and served 24 people. That caviar, even the affordable red lumpfish version, represented genuine extravagance that transformed ordinary deviled eggs into something worthy of the fanciest party your family hosted annually. 12 hard-boiled eggs halved, yolks mashed with 1/4 cup of mayonnaise, 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard, salt, and white pepper created the base filling. Then came the moment that separated Christmas eggs from everyday eggs, spooning small mounds of red caviar onto each one, creating glistening ruby tops that caught the light and announced luxury to everyone approaching the buffet table. The caviar had to go on just before serving, applied too early. The salt drew moisture that turned those jewel-like eggs into weeping messes that looked sad rather than sophisticated. Experienced hostesses kept the caviar jar refrigerated, adding those final touches as the doorbell rang with the first guests. The salty pop of caviar against creamy egg yolk created flavor combinations that made guests close their eyes in appreciation. Assemble within 2 hours, caviar weeps. The sound of bacon sizzling under the broiler announced that someone was making rumaki, and half the party would gather in the kitchen doorway, drawn by that irresistible aroma of bacon fat dripping onto hot pans. Rumaki cost $6 and served 30 people with appetizers so rich that 2 pieces satisfied even hungry teenage boys who normally emptied entire platters. 1 pound of chicken livers cut into bite-sized pieces, 1 can of water chestnuts halved, 1 pound of bacon cut into thirds, ½ cup of soy sauce, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and 1 teaspoon of ground ginger created the most exotic appetizer most suburban families ever attempted. Wrapping each liver-water-chestnut combination in bacon, securing it with toothpicks, and broiling until the bacon crisped took timing and attention. These had to be served hot. Serve immediately. Don't reheat. The sight of frosted grapes rolled in chopped walnuts looked like something from a fancy restaurant rather than someone's home kitchen, which was exactly why ambitious hostesses made them for their most important Christmas parties. 8 ounces of cream cheese, 4 ounces of crumbled blue cheese, 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, 2 pounds of seedless grapes washed and completely dried, and 2 cups of finely chopped walnuts created individual bites that looked like professional catering. The cheese mixture had to be soft enough to spread, but firm enough to cling to the grapes without sliding off. Rolling each grape in cheese, then in walnuts, required patience and cold hands. Warm fingers melted the cheese coating. Smart women worked in batches, keeping uncoated grapes refrigerated, while coating a dozen at a time, then returning finished ones to the refrigerator before starting the next batch. The combination of sweet grape, tangy blue cheese, and crunchy walnut created flavor complexity that made guests pause mid-conversation to ask about the recipe. Keeps refrigerated 3 days. The smell of hot pastry filled with clams announced sophisticated taste and willingness to serve seafood at inland parties where fresh fish was expensive and somewhat suspect to guests who'd grown up far from oceans. Clam puffs cost $6 and served 36 people with appetizers so light they seemed to dissolve on the tongue, despite being substantial enough to satisfy hungry guests through long cocktail hours before dinner. 1 package of frozen puff pastry thawed, 2 cans of minced clams drained completely, 8 ounces of cream cheese, 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan, 2 tablespoons of minced onion, 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, and pinch of cayenne created elegant bites that puffed dramatically in hot ovens. The key was draining those clams until absolutely dry, squeezing them in clean kitchen towels until no moisture remained. Wet clams made soggy puffs that collapsed instead of rising into golden pillows. The sight of pink ham spirals with green pickle centers arranged in perfect rows on rectangular platters created the kind of geometric food presentation that characterized mid-century entertaining when appearance mattered as much as taste. Ham and pickle roll-ups cost $4 and fed 40 people with appetizers so simple that teenagers could make them, yet so visually appealing that guests assumed they required professional skill. 1 pound of thinly sliced deli ham, 8 ounces of cream cheese softened to spreading consistency, and 1 jar of dill pickle spears drained and dried created 40 individual spirals, spreading each ham slice with thin layer of cream cheese, placing a pickle spear at one end, rolling tight, and securing with toothpicks took assembly line efficiency that turned tedious work into family activity. The rolls had to be refrigerated at least 2 hours before slicing. Warm cream cheese squished out the sides when cut, creating messy rather than neat spirals. Cold rolls sliced cleanly into perfect pinwheels that held their shape on platters throughout long parties. Smart hostesses made these the day before, wrapping unsliced rolls in wax paper and refrigerating them overnight, then slicing them fresh on party day for maximum visual impact. 10 recipes down, 1/3 finished. From salmon logs to ham roll-ups, you've learned appetizers requiring genuine skill and advanced planning. These women understood food is how we say, "you matter," when words aren't enough. 20 more recipes revealed even more sophisticated techniques and deeper commitment. The bubbling sound of cheese fondue in its special pot created the most interactive appetizer service at any Christmas party, turning eating into a social activity that encouraged conversation and laughter as guests competed for the best meatballs. Cheese fondue meatballs cost $9 and served 25 people through an entire evening of dipping, eating, and returning for more in a cycle that kept guests engaged with the food and with each other rather than standing awkwardly holding drinks. 2 pounds of ground beef mixed with 1 cup of breadcrumbs, 1 egg, salt, pepper, and garlic powder formed into marble-sized meatballs and baked until browned created the dipping elements. The fondue itself required 1 pound of grated Gruyere cheese, 1 pound of grated Emmentaler cheese, 2 cups of white wine, 1 clove of garlic rubbing the inside of the pot, 3 tablespoons of cornstarch, and 1/4 cup of kirsch, added at the end for authentic Swiss flavor. The fondue pot had to stay warm over its sterno flame, with the cheese mixture stirred occasionally to prevent scorching on the bottom. Guests used long fondue forks to spear meatballs and swirl them through the thick cheese sauce, creating strings of melted cheese that had to be caught with mouths before they dripped. This required special equipment, the fondue pot, the forks, the warming stand, that announced serious investment in entertaining properly. The aroma of lobster in cream sauce announced the most extravagant appetizer most families served all year, reserved exclusively for Christmas Eve, when showing off was not just acceptable but expected among friends who'd known each other for decades. Lobster Newburg in pastry shells cost $18 and served 24 people with the kind of luxury that made guests feel genuinely special rather than merely fed, creating memories that lasted long after the party ended. 2 pounds of cooked lobster meat cut into bite-sized pieces, 4 tablespoons of butter, 1/4 cup of flour, 2 cups of heavy cream, 1/4 cup of sherry, 3 egg yolks, salt, white pepper, and pinch of cayenne created restaurant-quality sauce that rivaled anything served in the fanciest establishments. 24 store-bought pastry shells saved time without sacrificing elegance. The sauce required constant attention and gentle heat. Too hot, and the egg yolks scrambled into grainy lumps that ruined the silky texture. Whisking those yolks into the hot cream mixture demanded confidence and steady hands that came from years of making delicate sauces. The sherry added at the end provided subtle complexity that separated homemade versions from canned soup-based imitations. The smell of brown sugar caramelizing with vinegar created the most universally loved appetizer at every Christmas party, pleasing everyone from picky children to elderly aunts who normally complained about modern food being too fancy or too strange. Sweet and sour cocktail franks cost $5 and served 40 people with appetizers so reliable that their absence would have disappointed guests who'd come to expect them as part of your family's Christmas tradition. 2 pounds of cocktail-sized frankfurters, 1 cup of brown sugar packed tight, ½ cup of white vinegar, 1/4 cup of ketchup, 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, and 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, mixed with water, created thick, glossy sauce that clung to each little sausage. The sauce had to simmer until it reduced and thickened, coating the back of a spoon in a way that announced proper consistency. Keeping these warm in a chafing dish over low heat allowed guests to serve themselves throughout the evening, with toothpicks stuck into each frank for easy grabbing. The sweet, tangy sauce dripped slightly, requiring small plates or napkins that smart hostesses positioned strategically near the chafing dish. Children loved these because the sweetness masked any unfamiliar flavors, while adults appreciated them as nostalgic comfort food that reminded them of every party they'd attended since childhood. Christmas morning meant standing at the kitchen counter, spreading crab meat mixture onto dozens of small rye bread rounds, creating elegant bites that would be photographed, admired, and consumed within the first 30 minutes of your party starting. Crab meat canapes cost $14 and served 36 people with appetizers so sophisticated that serving them announced your family had achieved a certain level of success that allowed spending serious money on party food that would disappear in moments. 1 pound of fresh lump crab meat picked over carefully for shells, 8 ounces of cream cheese, 1/4 cup of mayonnaise, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 tablespoon of prepared horseradish, 2 tablespoons of minced fresh chives, salt, and white pepper created filling that tasted expensive because it was. 36 small rounds of cocktail rye bread, toasted lightly, provided the base that could support the creamy topping without becoming soggy. The crab meat had to be handled gently. Overmixing broke it into tiny shreds that looked cheap rather than luxurious. Folding it into the cream cheese mixture with a light touch preserved those beautiful lumps that proved you'd used real crab rather than imitation. These canapes had to be assembled within 2 hours of serving. The moisture from the filling gradually soaked into the bread, transforming crisp toast into soft mush that collapsed when picked up, announcing amateur timing to everyone watching. This recipe represents why your grandmother spent 48 hours preparing for a 4-hour party, because real crab meat picked clean of shells, fresh chives minced by hand, and bread toasted in small batches couldn't be rushed or faked, because creating food this good required time, money, and genuine commitment to making guests feel valued. Because the kind of love that shows up as perfect crab meat canapes can't be bought pre-made at any grocery store, no matter how much you're willing to spend. Assemble within 2 hours of serving. The sight of mushroom caps arranged on baking sheets, stuffed with savory filling and ready for the oven, meant your hostess was making appetizers that required genuine cooking skill rather than just assembly of store-bought ingredients. Stuffed mushroom caps cost $7 and served 30 people with hot appetizers that filled the house with the irresistible aroma of sausage, garlic, and herbs baking together in a way that made guests immediately hungry. 30 large white mushroom caps with stems removed and reserved, 1 pound of Italian sausage removed from casings, 1 small onion minced fine, 2 cloves of garlic minced, the reserved mushroom stems chopped, 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs, 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, 2 tablespoons of fresh parsley, salt, and pepper created filling that packed each mushroom cap full. The mushroom caps had to be wiped clean with damp paper towels rather than washed. Water made them soggy and prevented proper browning in the oven. Cooking the sausage until it lost all pink color, then adding the onions, garlic, and chopped stems created the base filling that had to cool slightly before mixing in the breadcrumbs and cheese. These could be stuffed hours ahead and refrigerated, then baked just before guests arrived, filling your home with that welcoming aroma that made people relax the moment they walked through the door. Bake fresh. Serve hot immediately. 15 recipes down halfway through. Notice how these get progressively complex? First 5 were simple. Middle section introduced expensive ingredients. This wasn't accidental. Women built reputations gradually. The next 15 reveal peak mid-century sophistication, appetizers only the most confident hostesses attempted. The smell of beef tenderloin roasting announced the most expensive appetizer most families served all year, reserved for Christmas Eve, when the guest list included people whose opinions mattered: bosses, important neighbors, the minister, and his wife. Beef tenderloin crostini cost $22 and served 40 people with appetizers so luxurious that serving them announced your family's financial success in a way that words never could, creating impressions that influenced how people perceived your social standing. 1 beef tenderloin roasted to medium-rare perfection, cooled completely, and sliced paper-thin created the protein element. 40 small baguette slices toasted until golden and crisp provided the base. Horseradish cream sauce made from 1 cup of sour cream, 3 tablespoons of prepared horseradish, 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard, salt, and pepper created the binding element that brought everything together. Roasting that tenderloin required confidence and a meat thermometer. Overcooking turned expensive beef into ordinary pot roast texture that wasted money and reputation. Pulling it from the oven at exactly 125 degrees internal temperature, then letting it rest for 20 minutes while the temperature rose to perfect medium rare separated women who understood meat from women who guessed and hoped. Slicing the cooled beef against the grain into pieces so thin you could almost see through them required a sharp knife and steady hands. Thick slices looked clumsy and made the meat chewy rather than tender. Each crostini got one slice of beef, a small dollop of horseradish cream, and perhaps a tiny sprig of fresh dill or parsley for color. These had to be assembled close to serving time. The moisture from the sauce gradually soaked into the toast, and the beef began to oxidize and darken if left sitting too long, transforming elegant appetizers into tired-looking leftovers. Assemble within 1 hour of serving. Christmas afternoon meant standing at the kitchen sink deveining 2 pounds of shrimp by hand, a tedious task that couldn't be rushed or delegated because improperly cleaned shrimp ruined even the most expensive appetizers with gritty texture and bitter aftertaste. Shrimp remoulade on endive leaves cost $16 and served 30 people with appetizers that looked like something from a French restaurant rather than someone's home kitchen, creating the kind of sophisticated presentation that made guests take photos before eating. 2 pounds of large shrimp cooked just until pink, cooled, and halved lengthwise created the protein. 30 Belgian endive leaves, separated and washed, provided edible serving vessels that eliminated the need for plates. Remoulade sauce made from 1 cup of mayonnaise, 1/4 cup of Creole mustard, 2 tablespoons of capers chopped fine, 2 tablespoons of fresh parsley, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 2 teaspoons of paprika, 1 teaspoon of hot sauce, and minced garlic created the complex tangy dressing that transformed simple shrimp into restaurant-quality bites. The shrimp had to be cooked perfectly. Rubbery, overcooked shrimp announced amateur cooking skills to everyone who took a bite. Watching them carefully as they turned from gray to pink, then immediately plunging them into ice water to stop the cooking required attention and timing that came from experience. Using endive leaves as serving vessels was brilliant hospitality. Guests could eat these appetizers without juggling plates or napkins, making standing reception service elegant rather than awkward. The slight bitterness of the endive balanced the rich remoulade sauce perfectly, creating flavor complexity that made guests pause to appreciate what they were tasting. Assemble within 3 hours. Shrimp oxidizes. The sight of golden pastry-wrapped cheese being carried from the kitchen to the buffet table created the kind of dramatic presentation that made conversations stop as guests turned to watch, cameras ready to capture the moment before anyone cut into it. Brie en croute cost $15 and served 25 people with an appetizer so impressive that serving it announced culinary ambition and willingness to attempt French techniques that intimidated most American home cooks who'd never ventured beyond basic recipes. 1 wheel of Brie cheese, 1 sheet of frozen puff pastry thawed, 1/2 cup of whole cranberry sauce, 1/4 cup of chopped pecans, and 1 egg beaten for brushing created the components. The assembly required rolling the pastry large enough to completely enclose the cheese wheel, spreading cranberry sauce and pecans on top of the brie, wrapping it carefully, sealing all edges, and brushing with egg wash for golden shine. The key was working quickly with cold pastry. Warm pastry tore when stretched and turned greasy rather than flaky when baked. Chilling the assembled package for 30 minutes before baking helped the pastry maintain its shape rather than sliding off the cheese as it melted. Baking at 400 degrees for 25 minutes created pastry that puffed dramatically and turned deep golden brown while the cheese inside melted to perfect creamy consistency. Cutting into it while still warm released a rush of melted cheese that guests scooped onto crackers, creating interactive service that encouraged people to gather around the appetizer rather than taking one piece and walking away. Serve warm within 30 minutes of baking. The smell of prosciutto crisping in a hot oven announced sophisticated taste and willingness to serve Italian ingredients that most American grocery stores didn't even stock in their regular inventory, requiring special orders from the deli counter or trips to specialty markets. Prosciutto-wrapped asparagus cost $12 and served 30 people with appetizers that looked elegant enough for magazine photography while being surprisingly simple to prepare, proving that impressive results didn't always require complex techniques. 30 fresh asparagus spears trimmed to uniform length, 15 thin slices of prosciutto cut in half lengthwise, and olive oil for brushing created the only ingredients needed. Wrapping each asparagus spear in a strip of prosciutto, arranging them on baking sheets, brushing lightly with olive oil, and roasting at 425 degrees for 12 minutes created appetizers that combined fresh vegetable crispness with salty meat richness. The asparagus had to be thick enough to maintain texture during roasting. Thin spears turned mushy and limp, creating disappointing results that collapsed when picked up. Choosing spears with uniform thickness ensured even cooking, preventing some from being perfectly done, while others remained undercooked. The prosciutto crisped beautifully in the hot oven, its fat rendering and its edges turning golden brown, while the asparagus inside steamed gently, staying bright green and tender crisp. This contrast between crispy, salty exterior and fresh vegetable interior created the kind of flavor and texture combination that made guests reach for seconds immediately. These had to be served warm. Cold prosciutto turned rubbery and unpleasant, while the asparagus lost its vibrant color and fresh taste. Serve within 20 minutes of roasting. The sound of oyster crackers being tossed with seasoned butter in a large roasting pan announced the most addictive appetizer at any Christmas party, the one that guests couldn't stop eating despite knowing they should save room for dinner. Oyster cracker snack mix cost $3 and served 50 people with appetizers so simple that children could make them, yet so delicious that adults ate handfuls while standing at the counter, unable to walk away from the bowl. 1 pound of oyster crackers, 1 cup of melted butter, 1 package of ranch dressing mix, 1 tablespoon of dried dill weed, ½ teaspoon of garlic powder, and ¼ teaspoon of cayenne pepper tossed together and baked at 250 degrees for 20 minutes created crunchy, seasoned crackers that disappeared faster than anything else on the buffet table. The key was using real butter rather than margarine. Butter carried the seasonings better and created richer flavor that margarine couldn't match. Stirring the crackers every 5 minutes during baking ensured even coating and prevented burning on the bottom of the pan. These could be made weeks ahead and stored in airtight containers, making them perfect for hostesses who wanted to spread out their party preparation over several weekends, rather than doing everything in one exhausting marathon session. The seasoning actually improved over a few days as the flavors melded together, creating more complex taste than freshly made batches. Smart hostesses made double or triple batches, keeping extras hidden in the pantry to refill bowls throughout the party as guests devoured them. Keeps 1 month in airtight containers, 20 down, 10 remaining. You've traveled 3 decades of Christmas entertaining, simple salmon logs to elegant beef crostini. The progression shows everything: foundations, complexity, then mastery. These women knew 48 hours preparing for 4-hour parties wasn't inefficient. It was the point. Final 10 await. The sight of canned snails being opened in an American kitchen announced the most daring appetizer any hostess could serve, the one that separated women confident in their culinary sophistication from women who played it safe with crowd-pleasing basics that offended nobody. Escargot in mushroom caps cost $19 and served 24 people with appetizers so controversial that half your guests would refuse them on principle, while the other half would be impressed by your courage in serving something most Americans considered disgusting. Christmas morning meant unrolling smoked salmon from its expensive packaging, the smell of smoke and salt filling the kitchen as you prepared appetizers that cost more per pound than most families spent on their entire holiday roast. Smoked salmon pinwheels cost $24 and served 40 people with appetizers so luxurious that serving them announced your family's financial success more clearly than any Christmas card photo or new car in the driveway could communicate. 1 pound of thinly sliced smoked salmon, 16 ounces of cream cheese softened to spreading consistency, 1/4 cup of fresh dill chopped fine, 2 tablespoons of capers chopped, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and fresh ground black pepper created the filling. 8 large flour tortillas provided the wrapping that would be rolled tight and sliced into perfect spirals. Spreading cream cheese mixture on each tortilla, laying smoked salmon slices to cover completely, rolling tight, wrapping in plastic wrap, and refrigerating for at least 4 hours created firm logs that sliced cleanly into beautiful pinwheels showing salmon spirals against white cream cheese. The salmon had to be high quality. Cheap versions tasted fishy and had tough texture that ruined the delicate balance of flavors. Spending extra for good Norwegian or Scottish smoked salmon made the difference between appetizers that tasted expensive and appetizers that just cost a lot. Slicing these pinwheels required a very sharp knife and gentle sawing motion. Pressing down squished them into ugly ovals rather than maintaining perfect round shapes. Wiping the knife clean between cuts prevented cream cheese buildup that dragged and tore the tortillas. These represented the democratization of luxury. Smoked salmon had once been exclusively restaurant food, but by the 1970s, ambitious hostesses could buy it and serve it at home, bringing upscale dining experiences into suburban living rooms. Keeps refrigerated 2 days wrapped tightly. The sound of bacon sizzling around sweet dates created the most unexpected flavor combination at any Christmas party, the one that made guests stop mid-conversation to ask, "What is this?" before reaching for seconds and thirds. Bacon-wrapped dates cost $8 and served 30 people with appetizers that combined sweet, salty, crunchy, and chewy in ways that seemed impossible until you actually tasted them, creating flavor experiences that challenged everything guests thought they knew about how foods should pair together. 30 medjool dates pitted, 30 whole roasted almonds, 15 strips of bacon cut in half, and toothpicks for securing created the only ingredients needed. Stuffing each date with 1 almond, wrapping in half strip of bacon, securing with toothpick, and baking at 375 degrees for 25 minutes until bacon crisped, created appetizers that looked simple but tasted complex. The dates had to be fresh and soft. Dried-out dates turned hard and chewy during baking, creating unpleasant texture that made the bacon wrapping pointless. Squeezing each date gently before stuffing ensured it was moist enough to remain tender through cooking. The bacon fat dripped onto the baking sheet during cooking, pooling around the dates and creating slight caramelization on the bottom that added extra flavor dimension. Draining them briefly on paper towels before serving removed excess grease without sacrificing the crispy bacon texture. These represented mid-century America's growing willingness to experiment with unexpected flavor combinations that previous generations would have considered bizarre. The sweet-salty pairing that seems obvious now was revolutionary to people whose mothers had kept desserts and main courses strictly separated, never mixing sweet and savory in single bites. Serve warm within 30 minutes of baking. The smell of eggs and cheese baking in miniature pastry cups announced sophisticated French-inspired entertaining and willingness to attempt techniques that required genuine skill rather than just following simple assembly instructions. Mini quiche cups cost $11 and served 36 people with appetizers that looked professionally catered, despite being made entirely in your home kitchen, proving that impressive results came from technique and patience rather than expensive catering services. 36 miniature tart shells, either homemade or store-bought, 6 strips of bacon cooked crisp and crumbled, 1½ cups of grated Gruyere cheese, 4 eggs, 1 cup of heavy cream, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, salt, white pepper, and pinch of cayenne created classic quiche Lorraine in individual serving sizes, perfect for cocktail parties. The custard had to be mixed gently. Vigorous beating incorporated too much air that created bubbles and uneven texture during baking. Whisking just until eggs and cream combined smoothly created silky custard that set perfectly without becoming rubbery or watery. Filling each tart shell 3/4 full with custard mixture, sprinkling bacon and cheese on top, and baking at 350 degrees for 18 to 20 minutes until just set, created individual quiches that puffed slightly during baking, then settled as they cooled. The key was not overbaking. Quiche continued cooking from residual heat after leaving the oven, so pulling them when centers still jiggled slightly prevented dry, rubbery texture. They firmed up perfectly during cooling, creating creamy centers that contrasted beautifully with crispy pastry shells. These could be made ahead and reheated, making them practical for hostesses who wanted to spread preparation across multiple days rather than doing everything the morning of the party. Keeps refrigerated 3 days. Reheats well. The sight of bright green spinach balls arranged on platters announced health-conscious entertaining and willingness to serve vegetables as appetizers rather than relegating them to side dish status, where they could be ignored by picky eaters. Spinach balls cost $6 and served 40 people with appetizers that provided vegetable nutrition in formats that even children would eat, proving that healthy food could taste good when prepared with butter, cheese, and proper seasoning. 2 packages of frozen chopped spinach, thawed and squeezed completely dry. 2 cups of herb-seasoned stuffing mix. 1 cup of grated Parmesan cheese. 6 eggs beaten. 3/4 cup of melted butter. Half teaspoon of garlic powder. Salt and pepper mixed together and formed into walnut-sized balls created appetizers that could be made weeks ahead and frozen until party day. The key was squeezing that spinach until absolutely no moisture remained. Wet spinach made balls that fell apart during baking rather than holding their shape. Wrapping the thawed spinach in clean kitchen towels and twisting hard until water stopped dripping required arm strength and patience. 25 down, 5 left. From salmon logs to escargot, simple to sophisticated, you've learned how families expressed love through increasingly complex preparations. These final 5 require the most skill, most expensive ingredients, most confidence. You understand now, these aren't recipes, they're love made visible. The smell of puff pastry and beef tenderloin baking together announced the most ambitious appetizer any hostess could attempt, the one that required mastering multiple techniques and timing everything perfectly to achieve results that rivaled the fanciest restaurants in major cities. Beef Wellington bites cost $32 and served 24 people with appetizers so luxurious and technically challenging that successfully executing them established your reputation as a serious cook rather than someone who just followed simple recipes from women's magazines. One beef tenderloin cut into 1-inch cubes and seared quickly on all sides, half-pound of mushrooms chopped fine and cooked until all moisture evaporated, creating duxelles, 4 ounces of pate, 2 sheets of frozen puff pastry thawed, and 1 egg beaten for brushing created the components that had to be assembled with precision and speed. Each beef cube got coated with thin layer of pate, surrounded by mushroom duxelles, wrapped in pastry square, sealed completely, brushed with egg wash, and baked at 425 degrees for 15 minutes until pastry turned golden and beef reached medium rare inside. The timing was critical. Underbaked pastry stayed pale and doughy while overbaked beef turned gray and tough, ruining expensive ingredients and all the effort invested in preparation. Crab-stuffed cherry tomatoes cost $17 and served 36 people with appetizers that combined fresh vegetables with luxury seafood, creating the kind of refined presentation that characterized the most sophisticated Christmas parties where appearance mattered as much as taste. 36 large cherry tomatoes, 1 pound of lump crab meat picked carefully for shells, 8 ounces of cream cheese softened, 1/4 cup of mayonnaise, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 tablespoon of fresh dill chopped fine, 1 teaspoon of Old Bay seasoning, salt, and white pepper created filling that tasted expensive because it was. Cutting a thin slice from the top of each tomato, using a small spoon or melon baller to scoop out seeds and inner flesh, sprinkling insides lightly with salt, and inverting them onto paper towels to drain for 30 minutes, created vessels ready for filling. The draining was essential. Skipping this step resulted in watery filling that leaked onto platters, creating messy presentations that announced amateur technique. The crab meat had to be handled with extreme gentleness. Stirring vigorously broke those beautiful lumps into tiny shreds that looked cheap rather than luxurious. Folding it into the cream cheese mixture with a light touch preserved the chunks that proved you'd used real crab rather than imitation. Filling each tomato using a small spoon or piping it through a pastry bag fitted with a star tip created professional-looking results. The piped version took longer but created more impressive visual presentation that made guests pause to admire before eating. The moment a hostess served pâté de foie gras with truffles at her Christmas party, she announced that her family had achieved a level of financial success and culinary sophistication that separated them from merely comfortable middle-class families who served cheese balls and cocktail franks. Pâté de foie gras cost $45 and served 30 people with tiny portions of the most expensive appetizer most Americans would ever taste, creating experiences that guests remembered and discussed for years afterward as evidence of having attended truly elegant parties. 1 tin of imported pâté de foie gras, 1 small jar of black truffle pieces, 1 baguette sliced thin and toasted, and small cornichons for garnish created the components. The preparation was minimal. The luxury came entirely from the quality and expense of the ingredients, rather than from complex cooking techniques. Opening that tin of pâté released an aroma that polarized guests. Some found it rich and luxurious, while others thought it smelled like liver, which it was, spreading thin layers on toast points, topping with tiny pieces of truffle and arranging on silver platters with cornichons, created presentations that looked like something from French restaurants rather than suburban American homes. Serving this required confidence and willingness to accept that many guests would refuse to try it, intimidated by its reputation, strong flavor, an unfamiliar texture. The hostess who served pâté de foie gras wasn't trying to please everyone. She was establishing her position among the most sophisticated members of her social circle, the ones who'd traveled to Europe or dined at expensive restaurants in major cities. This represented the ultimate expression of mid-century aspirational entertaining, serving food that most Americans considered too fancy, too expensive, and too foreign, proving that your family had transcended ordinary middle-class status to join the ranks of the truly cultured. The sight of a caviar pie being carried to the buffet table created the kind of dramatic moment that made guests gasp audibly, pulling out cameras to photograph an appetizer that cost more than most families spent on their entire Christmas dinner, creating visual evidence of extraordinary hospitality. Caviar pie cost $68 and served 25 people with the single most expensive appetizer any hostess could serve. The one that announced wealth and sophistication more clearly than any other food choice possibly could, establishing social hierarchies through ingredient costs that most families couldn't afford. 8 hard-boiled eggs, chopped fine, half cup of mayonnaise, 1 small onion minced, and white pepper mixed and pressed into an 8-inch springform pan created the base layer. 8 ounces of cream cheese, softened and mixed with half cup of sour cream, spread on top, created the second layer. 4 ounces of black caviar, carefully spooned over the cream cheese layer, created the dramatic black top. Chopped fresh chives, minced hard-boiled egg whites, and lemon wedges arranged around the edges created the garnish. Refrigerating this for at least 4 hours allowed the layers to set firmly enough that slicing and serving didn't create messy, collapsed piles. Releasing the springform pan sides just before serving created clean edges that looked professionally molded. Guests served themselves by spreading small amounts on toast points or crackers, creating their own combinations of the layers. The key was using real caviar rather than cheaper alternatives. Lumpfish roe or salmon roe didn't create the same luxury experience that made this appetizer worth its extraordinary cost. The final appetizer wasn't savory at all. It was tiny champagne grapes, dusted with powdered sugar, served as palate cleanser after rich, savory foods, representing the kind of sophisticated menu planning that separated legendary hostesses from women who just put out food without considering how flavors and textures should flow throughout an evening. Champagne grapes cost $12 for 2 pounds and served 30 people with small clusters of these tiny sweet grapes that looked like jewelry when arranged properly, creating visual interest and providing light, refreshing contrast to heavier cream-based and fried appetizers. 2 pounds of champagne grapes washed gently and dried completely. Half cup of powdered sugar for dusting, and fresh mint leaves for garnish created the simplest yet most elegant ending to your appetizer progression. The grapes had to be completely dry. Any moisture made the powdered sugar dissolve into sticky paste rather than creating the delicate frosted appearance that made them special. Arranging small clusters on a silver platter, dusting liberally with powdered sugar through a fine mesh sieve, and tucking fresh mint leaves between clusters created presentation that looked like something from a high-end catering company. The key was dusting them just before serving. The sugar absorbed moisture from the grapes over time, losing its powdery appearance. These represented the ultimate sophistication, knowing when to stop adding richness and instead offering something light, fresh, and palate-cleansing that allowed guests to continue enjoying food throughout long parties without feeling overwhelmed by heavy flavors. This kind of menu planning required experience and confidence that came from years of entertaining and paying attention to how guests responded to different food combinations. Which of these 30 forgotten Christmas appetizers did your grandmother make? Comment the recipe name and your state. I'm mapping where these mid-century entertaining traditions survived longest and which regions abandoned them first. If you made it through all 30 appetizers, you understand that the women who created and perfected these recipes weren't just cooking, they were building communities, strengthening friendships, establishing social positions, and expressing love through labor in ways that our era of pre-made grocery store platters and catered parties has completely lost. Their legacy lives on in the few families who still make these appetizers from handwritten recipe cards passed down through generations. They proved that creating memorable experiences for people you care about requires sacrifice of time, money, and energy, that the effort itself communicates love in ways that words never can. These 30 appetizers represent more than just food. They're historical documents showing how American families learned to celebrate after surviving impossible hardship. They're evidence of creativity, resourcefulness, and genuine hospitality during an era when entertaining was considered serious work worthy of respect. Their connections to women who understood that food is the language we use to say, "You matter to me," when plain words feel inadequate. Subscribe for more forgotten. These 30 appetizers represent more than just food. They're historical documents showing how American families learned to celebrate after surviving impossible hardship. They're evidence of creativity, resourcefulness, and genuine hospitality during an era when entertaining was considered serious work worthy of respect. Their connections to women who understood that food is the language we use to say, "You matter to me," when plain words feel inadequate. Subscribe for more forgotten food history that preserves the recipes, techniques, and stories that defined how previous generations lived, worked, and celebrated. Next video covers 30 Depression-era desserts that nobody makes anymore, the sweet endings to meals that proved families could create joy even during the hardest times in American history. From their kitchens to yours, don't let them forget what our grandmothers knew about showing love through food, building community through shared meals, and creating beauty. When you make that salmon party log this Christmas, you're connecting to thousands of women who made the same thing in 1955, feeling proud of creating something elegant from humble canned fish. When you wrap bacon around dates, you're participating in the sweet, salty revolution that changed how Americans thought about flavor combinations. When you serve beef Wellington bites, you're proving that suburban home cooks could master techniques once reserved for professional chefs in European restaurants. These aren't just quaint old recipes, they're living history. They're edible connections to people who came before us. They're proof that creating memorable experiences for people we love has always required genuine sacrifice, and that the kind of hospitality that makes people feel truly valued can't be bought pre-made at any price. So, as you plan your next Christmas party, consider adding one or two of these forgotten classics to your menu, because they're delicious, because they solve real entertaining challenges, and because making them connects you to a rich tradition of American home cooking that deserves to be remembered and continued. Share these recipes with your daughters. Teach your sons that cooking is a gift rather than a chore. Pass along stories of grandmothers who fed families and communities through hard times and good times. The women who made these appetizers understood something profound that we're still learning: that entertaining doesn't require perfection or enormous expense. It requires willingness to open your home, share what you have, and create space for people to gather and connect, that the salmon log made 3 days early eliminates stress, that the spinach balls frozen for weeks provide flexibility, that the cocktail franks in sweet sauce please everyone from children to grandparents. They knew that food is a language of love, that even the simplest appetizer prepared with care communicates warmth, hospitality, and respect for guests. That making people feel valued through food creates bonds that last far longer than the party itself. When you serve these recipes, you're not just feeding people. You're honoring everyone who survived the Depression and war, everyone who taught us that celebration matters, everyone who understood that gathering together with food is how communities heal and thrive. So, make that salmon party log and feel the pride of creating restaurant elegance from humble canned fish. Wrap those bacon-covered dates and experience the magic of sweet meeting salty in ways that make guests stop mid-conversation. Stuff those mushroom caps with sausage and fill your home with aromas that announce genuine hospitality. Pipe that crab meat into cherry tomatoes and create the kind of individual elegance that makes people pause to admire before eating. Dust those champagne grapes with powdered sugar and offer the palate-cleansing sophistication that separates legendary hostesses from people who just put out food. And remember that every single one of these 30 appetizers represents someone's grandmother standing in her kitchen at 5 in the morning, creating beauty and deliciousness for people she loved. These women proved that the best gift we can give isn't something bought from a store or ordered from a caterer. It's our time, our effort, our genuine care for making others feel valued and welcomed, because creating memorable experiences for people we love